It was a frozen Tuesday, the 11th of January, 1676, and the ground around Arthur Fenner's garrison house near Providence was hard as iron. Smoke from the stone chimney was instantly flattened by the bitter north wind. Joshua hadn't slept for days. Since the fire and blood of the Great Swamp Fight days earlier, he had lived as a phantom in the snow. He had guided the surviving Narragansett bands north, moving away from the massed colonial armies and toward the relative safety of the Nipmuc country. He was now a high-ranking asset to the Narragansett Sachem Canonchit, a man who understood the English mind, their supply lines, and the weaknesses of their linear volleys. The ambush at Fenner's house. The Narragansett were starving. Joshua had volunteered to lead a small raiding party to Fenner's farm, hoping to secure some hidden corn or a stray ox. He moved with the quiet grace he had learned from Sarah's brothers, his moccasins silent on the ice, but he was carrying the heavy burden of a vow to protect Peter for eternity. He was fighting not for victory, but to buy time for the future. The attack was swift. The small band burst from the cedar swamp, descending on the garrison house with war cries and fire. But the English were not sleeping. Fenner had reinforced his home with stone and a small company of Massachusetts militia. The air in the yard was suddenly alive with lead and smoke. Joshua, musket roaring, directed his warriors to the weak points of the cabin's barricades. He fought with a desperate, cold fury, driven by the memory of his wife's grave and the love tucked into his mother's journal. Recognition and betrayal. The tide turned when more English cavalry, alerted by the gunfire, swept in from the Providence road. The Narragansett warriors, realizing they were outnumbered, began a fighting retreat back toward the swamp. Joshua, covering their escape, was the last man on the open ground. He fired his final ball, felling a militia horse, and turned to run. But the frozen mud betrayed him. He slipped, falling hard against a sharpened stump. Before he could regain his feet, for Massachusetts soldiers were upon him, their muskets aimed at his chest. Joshua looked up into the smoky light of the dawn. The man standing over him, musket but raised, paused. He wiped the soot from his own face. "Wait!" the soldier shouted, his voice cracking with shock. "This is no heathen savage. I know this face." It was Captain Nathaniel Seeley of Connecticut. He had served with John Tefft during the founding of Portsmouth. He had seen Joshua as a boy. "Joshua Tefft?" Seeley whispered, his horror mounting. "The son of a freeman? Living in a wigwam? Apostate? The why of the capture?" Joshua didn't deny it. He pulled himself up, standing tall in his mix of English leather and Narragansett hide. His face was a mask of soot, blood, and a fierce, chilling resolve. "I am where my loyalty commands me, Seeley," Joshua said, his voice level and cold. "I fight for the land that belongs to my son." He was captured not just because he had lost a skirmish, but because he was a conceptual nightmare for the English colonies. High treason. He had joined the heathen against his own blood and nation. Military treachery. Reports from the Great Swamp Fight claimed a white man, widely believed to be Joshua, had directed the firing that had wounded Captain Seeley himself and killed dozens of other soldiers. He knew their language, their officers, and their fears. Cultural betrayal. He had crossed the line, marrying a non-English woman and adopting their customs. To the Puritans, this was a sin deeper than simple treason. It was an abandonment of civilization for the wilderness. They didn't just capture an enemy soldier. They captured an ideology they were determined to stamp out. The march to the castle. They bound his hands with rawhide and marched him south. Captain Seeley, despite his initial shock, ensured his heavy guard. As they crossed the Pawtuxet River, a lone figure watched from the opposite bank, Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island, a man who had advocated for peace, now watched Joshua with profound sadness. In his later letters, Williams would record the capture with grim detail, noting Joshua's unique status as a native son of the colony who had completely defected. The destination was Smith's Castle in Wickford. It was the staging ground for the colonial army, and the place where the judgment was already waiting. Joshua marched toward it knowing that the only thing between him and a traitor's death was the time it took to travel. But in his mind, he was still standing guard over the woods where Peter's future was.